This is a hearing, McPherson Square, who made the decision to allow indefinite camping in the park. The committee will come to order. I will recognize myself for an opening statement and yield to the chairman of the full committee, the gentleman from California, Mr. Issa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask to unanimous consent that a statement prepared by the individuals or group of individuals currently residing in McPherson Square as part of Occupy D.C. be placed into the record in its entirety.
Without objection.
I thank you. Yield back.
Thank the gentleman from California. Among the pillars that undergird this grand republic, at least two are at bar this morning. Number one, the freedom of speech and expression, and number two, our respect for the rule of law. These two principles are entirely consistent. Indeed, they have to be consistent. They can and they do coexist. So today we are not here to discuss the merits or demerits of the Occupy movement, at least I'm not. I'm here to try and glean what process, if any, the National Park Service goes through in determining whether to allow a residential encampment among the homes and offices in a busy area in downtown D.C., especially one where camping is strictly prohibited. And it is impossible to explore the role of the National Park Service without also hearing from the leaders within the District of Columbia. I suspect the witnesses from the District of Columbia will testify, as has been publicly reported, with respect to any adverse consequences associated with this encampment. We have all read with outrage and shock about an infant abandoned in a tent on one of the coldest days of the year. Mayor Gray wrote the Park Service on January 12th to warn them of dangerous rodent infestation, the risk of foodborne illnesses, and other potentially deleterious, if not deadly, concerns such as hypothermia and carbon monoxide poisoning. The District of Columbia and its leaders are in a completely untenable position. It is their responsibility to protect the health and safety of its residents, including those residents in McPherson Square. However, they do not have the authority to make the decision on whether or not to allow the camp to exist. The federal government owns the land and governs its use, sharing responsibility for the health and safety of those in the park. The Department of Interior has taken responsibility for the decision to allow the indefinite overnight camping at McPherson Square, and the process by which they reached this decision is at best curious and legally fragile. So many of us look forward to today's hearing because we were under the apparent misapprehension that camping was illegal in McPherson Square. And we look forward to hearing the National Park Service explain the difference between camping and a 24-hour vigil, especially when that 24-hour vigil lasts several months. The evidence is clear, at least in my judgment, that sleeping, cooking, and camping are taking place in McPherson Square despite protestations to the contrary, and apparently despite the clear prohibition against camping. So, to sum it up, issues of public safety for the protesters and others is important. Issues of free speech are important. Issues of cost and who bears the cost are important. It is manifestly unfair that the District of Columbia assume all the cost and liabilities for decisions made by the National Park Service. But at the bottom of it all is the issue of fair and equal application of the law, because from this vantage point, it appears that there are at least two very different sets of rules, and with the spring and summer a short distance away, I find it curious that tourists cannot come and pitch a tent in McPherson Square if they're camping for fun, but if they're camping in protest of fun, the National Park Service would welcome them. And with that, I would recognize the gentleman from Illinois, the ranking member, Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution reads, and I quote, "Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances." End of quote. Of course, the right to protest is not unrestricted. The Supreme Court has determined that certain limitations can be imposed to strike a delicate balance between order and the right to be heard. In a public forum, the government may restrict expression with time, place, and manner regulations. However, restrictions cannot be based upon the content of the speech and the regulation must not be substantially broader than necessary to achieve the government's interest. The history of dissent is a long and productive one, from the abolitionist flyers to the labor movement of the early 20th century, to women's suffrage, to the civil rights marches and peace protests. Our country has become a more inclusive and enlightened nation because people spoke truth to power. Dissenters met government resistance but preserved. Around-the-clock vigils and sit-ins are nothing new. The students that maintained their seats at a North Carolina Woolworth lunch counter ignited a movement to challenge injustice and helped change America. I understand that to be a part of civil disobedience, but I encourage those who seek government redress to operate in a peaceful manner. That being said, I certainly appreciate the National Park Service and the U.S. Park Police measured approach to the D.C. occupiers. We have not seen the disarray here that has been broadcast across our television screens from other cities. The federal agencies overseeing the lands and parks have a specific role in ensuring that the First Amendment rights are respected and protected. The District of Columbia, as a protest site, is of particular significance and importance. The district has a history of hosting some of the most significant protest activities of the modern era. Accordingly, in 2011, there were over 600 First Amendment activities on our national park lands. So I find it curious that this particular demonstration has risen to the level of a congressional hearing. The Occupy D.C. movement has not encountered widespread arrests. The visuals are in a concentrated area. The district receives funds for reimbursement annually for such activities. Further, the discretion allowed the Park Service allows for a reasonable approach of compliance, then enforcement or expulsion. I believe going forward, the Occupy D.C. movement should continue to be closely monitored to ensure proper safety, health, and sanitation. Interaction and cooperation of the various agencies to monitor the site should be encouraged. However, this protest, in its current form, does not rise to the level of necessary congressional intervention. This subcommittee should defer to the discretion of the National Park Service and err on the side of the First Amendment. And I'd like to yield just a minute to myself to read a portion of the statement from the Occupy D.C. General Assembly submitted to staff. Like so many whose voices are not heard in the halls of Congress, we have been precluded from speaking today on a matter that directly concerns us. That we have to ask a member of Congress to speak for us here is symbolic of the disenfranchised and top-down nature of the government that we're fighting to democratize. Citizens of a free country should not have to ask for permission to occupy public spaces. Our occupation of McPherson Square is an expression of our First Amendment right to free speech and peaceful assembly. We are maintaining a site of protest, a physical presence that gives visibility and voice to our dissent. We are creating a space in which free speech flourishes, not only the free speech of occupiers, but that of the general public, the empowered, and the disenfranchised alike." End of quote. Like most people, the members of Occupy D.C. at McPherson Square do not relish being in uncomfortable conditions that humans without housing have endured for millennia. We do so because it has become a necessary tactic to express our concern for the country's direction in a way that will maintain public attention. 2 out of every 3 Americans, incidentally, agree that our country is headed in the wrong direction. A far smaller percentage approves of the job Congress is doing. And while foreclosure has become a hallmark of modern America, the solutions to our country's numerous problems do not include suppressing free speech and evicting patriots from their tents, The very existence of a committee of politicians controlling a city, none of them were elected in its offensive, though McPherson Square happens to have been declared federal land. D.C.'s forced submission to congressional control is the height of hypocrisy for a nation that considers itself the global arbiter of democracy. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for the opportunity and yield back the balance of our time.
I thank the gentleman from Illinois. The Chair will now recognize the gentleman from California, the Chairman of the full committee, Mr. Issa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If this were about protests today, we wouldn't be having this hearing. I was here May 4th, got to get my millennium right. I was here May 4th, 1971, the first anniversary of the killings at Kent State, in which the mall was filled with protesters, anti-war protesters, and protesters over the campus disruptions and the early dismissal of universities throughout the country as a result of their law-abiding protest. The fact is, we are all here respecting and promoting the idea that D.C. is and will continue to be a place for protest to occur. If anything, I believe we facilitate it like no other city in the United States, and I want to continue to do so. But, Mr. Chairman, let me just give you a fairly straightforward number. I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I looked up, and an acre is roughly 208 feet by 208 feet. So 1.66 acres, the size of this square, makes it one of the smallest parks that the Park Service oversees. If we are to say that any place here in the district or around the country for a protest can become a campground simply because someone is protesting, then as we hear from Mr. Jarvis and others, we're basically going to have to figure out a way to put showers and restrooms and other sanitary requirements in parks that may be an acre or two. We're going to have to station park rangers to do their job, because not all those who would choose to camp can be trusted the way so far this has worked out. We have challenges that we have to face, but the real reason that we have the Park Service here today is to find out why the District of Columbia, for one, and it doesn't matter which side, ideologically driven protest, is breaking all of its own rules, citing some First Amendment that, if you cite it uniformly, will change the whole dimension of where people get to go to national parks. Plenty of national parks take everyone out, if necessary at gunpoint at dark, and tell them they're no longer welcome in the park, that their hours of operations are dawn to dusk or some other time. There are all kinds of areas in which you can or can't be in various federal lands. That's not what we're debating here. We're debating the uniform use of a designation of campground versus not campground, and more importantly, and we'll hear from two distinguished members of the District of Columbia, we're dealing with the fact that the District of Columbia is bearing the brunt of this lack of uniformity, lack of enforcement, even when there is a Supreme Court decision that makes it very clear that campers should not be there. Protesters during hours of operation, actually protesters 24 hours a day. If they want to come with candles and stand, that's fine. Freedom is not an absence of uniform rules. Yesterday, there was a National Right to Life protest in this city. They came, they protested, and they left. If they'd chosen to stay, they would have been expected to get hotel rooms or in some other lawful way find accommodations. We're going to hear from the city what this is doing to them. Hopefully we'll hear what would happen if this became sort of the law of the land, whether it was for the left or the right. How would we deal with it? What would we have to fund the city? What would be the sanitary requirements and the like? And ultimately, would this simply become, I protest, therefore I can stay anywhere I want? So, Mr. Chairman, I asked to have the Occupy DC's statement put in the record, and I appreciate that you did so at the very opening. I want them to be heard. But candidly, I want to hold our government agencies, federal government agencies, to respect a uniform set of rules and not choose which First Amendment advocates to choose. We will hear in their opening statements today exactly that. We'll hear that this is narrowly trying to balance. The Supreme Court's already spoken on what the balance is. They have a clear ability and requirement to prohibit overnight camping according to their own rules, and they are not doing it. And I'm deeply disappointed. I feel that the Park Service has entered into an ideological fray by making this decision on behalf of the administration, when in fact the decision could have been very clear. Stay awake, stay vertical, don't be camping here, and you're welcome to stay and have an active protest as long as you want. When you need to sleep, go elsewhere and come back. When you need to use restroom facilities and showers and other hygienic requirements that are not actively available in this very, very small 1.66 acres, go elsewhere and come back. That's the message we should have sent, and as the committee that oversees and has responsibility to protect the rights, privileges, and candidly obligation that we put on the District of Columbia, we must first and foremost remember this is the District of Columbia's burden being borne by this lack of uniformity. And if we don't find a common and predictable set of rules for the future, then we put the District of Columbia in a very untenable position that while welcoming legitimate protest, they find themselves unable to predict who will sleep where and what they will or won't be able to do with it. So, Mr. Chairman, this is a narrow hearing. I appreciate your calling it. I believe the issue is important, albeit very, very much about, as I had previously said, what we as a committee need to make sure is fair and right for the District of Columbia. And I appreciate your indulgence. Yield back.
I thank the Chairman. The Chair will now recognize the gentleman from Maryland, the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gowdy, and the ranking member Davis for holding today's hearing and providing us with an opportunity to speak up on behalf of the millions of Americans who are demanding justice and fairness from both their government and elements of the private sector. In fact, Mr. Chairman, in many ways I find it baffling that we are actually convening this morning's hearing to debate the merits of allowing Americans to use their public parks as a venue in which to express their First Amendment rights, a practice that is as old as our republic and as fundamental to our democracy as our Constitution, which guarantees the right of assembly. Even more alarming is that the majority has fast-tracked today's hearing while repeatedly ignoring and dragging their feet on our request to fully investigate mortgage servicers' alleged abuses against American families. Given the extent of the foreclosure crisis and the harm it has caused so many homeowners across the nation, I am deeply concerned about the committee's failure to use its investigative power to protect American consumers or examine the numerous allegations of wrongdoing by banks. I repeatedly raised these concerns, and today I sent a letter to the Chairman renewing my request for a comprehensive investigation into wrongful foreclosures and other abuses by mortgage servicing companies. While neglecting the harm that many Americans are suffering at the hands of mortgage servicers, the majority has leapt to investigate whether banks have been the victims of abuse from American citizens. The majority sent letters to several banks requesting information that supports the highly improbable allegation that representatives of Occupy movement attempted to extort major banks. The responses have stated that the banks are not aware of any instances of the alleged conduct. To that, I too want to welcome our witnesses and thank you for agreeing to come before us today. The District of Columbia is no stranger to the host of challenges and benefits that come with being home of the national government in the world's oldest democracy. Given the constant stream of citizen demonstrations, special events, marches, and petitions for redress of grievances, I recognize that balancing the right of our fellow citizens to assemble peacefully while simultaneously protecting the health, safety, and property of the city's residents and visitors is no easy task. Therefore, I applaud both the city government and the myriad of federal agencies that work collectively and routinely to balance these interests. When folks are hurting and struggling, as many Americans presently are, it's all the more critical that they be able to raise their voices and demand change. The recent Occupy movement that has emerged in cities and communities across this great nation represents the people's demand for progress. People want jobs. They want better treatment. They want adequate housing, and more importantly, they want action. And they have the constitutional right to make their voices heard. While practical considerations associated with the prolonged presence of Occupy D.C. protesters at McPherson Square must certainly be addressed, concerns over grass seeds should outweigh grassroots efforts to seek improvements and help for our most vulnerable citizens. Nor should rats be allowed to stand in the way of the demand for real reform, especially when there are easy ways to rectify such problems at limited cost. A little over a week ago, our country came together to celebrate the life and the legacy of the legendary Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. He stood for equal opportunity and equal rights for all. Dr. King exemplified how the peaceful exercise of the rights enshrined in our Constitution can truly change the world. Reverence for these rights must remain at the heart of all that we are as a nation. Again, I want to thank each of our witnesses for coming before us today, and I especially want to express my heartfelt sympathy to you, Director Jarvis, for your agency's recent loss of Park Ranger Margaret Anderson in Mount Rainier, Washington. It's truly an unfortunate reminder that our federal public servants are in fact exposed to significant risks while performing their daily duties. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Maryland. Members may have 7 days to submit opening statements and extraneous material for the record. We will now welcome our distinguished panel of witnesses. Mr. Paul Quanter is the Deputy Mayor for Public Safety and Justice for the District of Columbia. Chief Kathy Lanier is the Chief of the Metropolitan Police Department. Dr. Mohammed Akhtar is the Director of the D.C. Department of Health. Mr. Timothy Zick is the Cable Research Professor of Law at William & Mary School of Law, and Mr. Jonathan Jarvis is the Director of National Park Service. We will hear your opening statements. We will start with you, Mr. Quander, and go from my left to right, your right to left. The lights mean what they traditionally mean in life. Green means go, yellow means speed up, go as fast as you can, and then red means stop. All right? Pursuant to committee rules, I will swear the witnesses. I would ask that you rise and lift your right hands. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? May the record reflect all witnesses answered in the affirmative. Mr. Quanter, we will now recognize you for your opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman Gowdy and members of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. Thank you for the opportunity to present testimony and observation on issues surrounding Occupy D.C. encampments located at Freedom Plaza and McPherson Square. My name is Paul Quander, and I serve as the Deputy Mayor for Public Safety and Justice in the District of Columbia. I am joined today by Chief Kathy Lanier of the Metropolitan Police Department and Dr. Mohammed Akhtar, Director of the District of Columbia Department of Health. On October 6, 2011, the National Park Service granted permission to and allowed two very distinct Occupy D.C. groups to establish sites upon federal property for the purpose of protesting a variety of issues. These sites and demonstrations were and continue to be located at Freedom Plaza, 14th and Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest, 3 blocks southeast of the White House, and McPherson Square, 2 blocks northwest of the White House, at 15th and K Streets, Northwest Washington. During the first week of the Occupy movement, there were approximately 150 protesters at Freedom Plaza and 250 at McPherson Square. Since Thanksgiving, the number of occupants has fluctuated, with the Freedom Plaza group numbering approximately 30 to 40 participants and the McPherson contingent numbering about 25 to 50 participants. Initially, a significant number of Metropolitan Police officers were deployed to address Occupy D.C., including the Metropolitan Police Department's Special Operations Division, SOD, as well as its Civil Disturbance Units, which is staffed by patrol members. After the first week, however, MPD was able to decrease the resources used for Occupy D.C., except for major movements or incidents. In the ensuing weeks of the encampments, there were approximately 4 occasions which required the Metropolitan Police Department to detail more than 1 or 2 officers per patrol district per shift from the Civil Disturbances Units. These events included the Americans for Prosperity meeting at the Convention Center on November the 4th, the March on Key Bridge on November 17th, the K Street protest on December the 7th, and the Occupy Congress March last week on January the 17th. MPD staffing for those incidents has ranged from 80 to 400 officers. For the most part, protests and the occupants of the encampments have been peaceful. There are the usual taunting and insulting of police, which is common. However, on a few occasions, the tactics of the protesters have become very aggressive and dangerous, resulting in injuries and situations where law-abiding citizens were unable to exit buildings or travel on our public roadways. For instance, in one incident at the Convention Center, blocking entrances and exits to the Convention Center, using children as tools, as impediments, as well as physically challenging attendees of the events, espousing opposing political views. These are all unacceptable tactics and potentially very harmful. Blocking traffic and jumping in front of vehicles is especially dangerous. Furthermore, there have been incidents of destruction of property. But most worrisome has been the incidents of violence at McPherson Square, such as the attacks on a park police officer and later an occupant of the encampment, both of which resulted in hospitalization. And most recently, we had the neglect of a 13-month-old child, barely clothed, who was left unattended by her father. As of January 19th, the Metropolitan Police Department has arrested 68 individuals affiliated with the Occupy protest. An additional 13 protesters were arrested by another district police force on the grounds of Franklin School. There have been other arrests by Federal law enforcement officers. While the numbers of protesters has dwindled this winter, it does not alleviate the potential for escalating protest tactics. The point of any protest is to exercise a constitutional right and at the same time attract attention to the cause. If the sheer numbers do not demand notice, experience has shown us that escalating tactics may be used to garner attention. The District has a continuing obligation to provide for the overall health and welfare of its residents and visitors to the City. Several District of Columbia agencies are working to ensure the well-being of the protesters and to assess and mitigate the impact of their presence on the community. Although there have not been any public health emergencies, such as outbreaks of communicable diseases or reported foodborne illnesses, we will remain vigilant in monitoring and protecting the health and safety of the demonstrators. The Department of Health has led an effort to address many of the issues. I just need to point out certain of the areas that we are concentrating on. Hypothermia remains a serious condition. Rodent harborage and abatement is a major factor. Food safety, prescription medications, and physical health screenings are something that we are encouraging the protesters to participate in. We also need to be cognizant of emergency evacuation plans for when makeshift utensils and heating apparatuses are used. There is a potential for harm and danger. With this, Mr. Chairman, I conclude my testimony and look forward to answering any questions that the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Quander. I have been informed, but I want to verify the District of Columbia representatives will have one opening statement, or Chief Leader?
It's one opening statement, and Chief Lanier and Dr. Actor and I will be available to answer and respond to any questions that the committee may have.
Fantastic. I didn't want to skip over anybody, so I'll now go to Professor Zick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Although we're focused here on a particular public place, I think this is an important national issue. There have been Occupy movements, as you know, across the country. This is a protest that is unique, a demonstration that's unique in its methods. It raises some of the same resource concerns that sit-ins and parades and marches do, but it's different in an important respect, and that is this. The movement seeks permanence of place. It seeks to occupy or commandeer a place as part of its First Amendment message. I think it's important to keep that in mind as you consider the First Amendment implications of possibly evicting them from this place. It's not simply, as Chairman Issa said, an opportunity to be heard. It's also an opportunity to be seen. Both of those things are protected under the First Amendment. The place that's being occupied and demonstrated in this particular instance is a special place. It's a public forum, which under First Amendment doctrine means that, as the Supreme Court has said, time out of mind, people have gathered there for assembly and speech and petition to discuss matters of public concern. And in particular, in the District of Columbia, given the situs of government, these places have been treated by the D.C. Circuit and other courts as special forums or locuses for protest activity. That said, and as some committee members have already suggested, protest rights in public places are not absolute. That is true. The agency that is charged with managing this property has two main responsibilities. The first, which I think it's discharged quite well, particularly in light of its history in the courts, and I can speak to that maybe in questions rather than my statement, is to make sure that First Amendment rights are fully preserved and robustly protected. It has done that in this particular case through a process of negotiated management rather than forceful eviction. To my mind, that's a plausible choice to make and a worthy one. I'm in the odd position here of actually defending an agency for potentially overprotecting speech. It's a rather odd position for me because normally I'm critical of the government for restricting First Amendment rights in public places. So in terms of that particular trusteeship obligation to protect the rights of people to assemble, petition, and speak in public places, the agency, as I said, has discharged its responsibilities and obligations quite well. I know the committee, though, is concerned about the balance of those particular fundamental liberties with the interests of the public in safety and health and order and those sorts of concerns. I can say, having looked at the regulations, that the agency is in compliance with most of them. I can't speak in particular to the camping one because that depends on facts on the ground and a totality of circumstances determination by the agency. But no permit is required for a demonstration of this size. There are no explicit time limits in the regulations on protests. Some structures are permitted. Some, as I understand it, have been removed on action of the agency and local officials. So in large part, the agency has been in compliance with its own regulations. I understand the concern that the agency not be permitted to prefer some speakers over the others, and I want to be clear about what that obligation is under the First Amendment. It is not inappropriate necessarily to prefer fundamental liberties to other uses of the property. What would be inappropriate is to prefer some speakers over others based upon their viewpoint or the content of their message. I'm not aware of any instance in which the agency has not permitted a group to occupy a place in this fashion, to demonstrate in this way, but permitted this particular demonstration to go forward. So it's not clear to me that the agency has done anything in violation of that principle of content neutrality. So in my view, it can prefer that use to other uses of the public property. There are concerns, I think, about allowing people to occupy and demonstrate in this fashion and what that will do to public parks, and the Chairman raised that particular issue. I would say that allowing this activity to take place and this demonstration to occur does not mean you cannot enforce reasonable time, place, and manner regulations, including on the time and location of public demonstrations. But again, in McPherson Square, the regulations permit an assembly of this sort, a demonstration of this sort. I'd be happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Zick. Mr. Jarvis.
Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the National Park Service's handling of the Occupy D.C. demonstrations at McPherson Square. This hearing takes place in the District of Columbia, the capital of our nation and the seat of our federal government. It is here, perhaps more than any other place in the United States, that Americans come to exercise their First Amendment rights, to peacefully assemble, to petition their government for redress of grievances, and to exercise their right of freedom of speech. All 397 of America's national parks, but especially the national parks in Washington, D.C., are places where citizens' rights are guaranteed under our nation's Constitution. Among law enforcement agencies in the nation, the National Park Service and its urban law enforcement organization, the United States Park Police, have perhaps the greatest experience handling First Amendment activities. In 2011 alone, there were 626 permitted First Amendment activities on NPS lands here in Washington, D.C. Not all First Amendment activities require a permit. Therefore, these numbers are only a portion of those taking place in our capital city. A few examples of the historic large-scale First Amendment demonstrations here on NPS lands include the annual Right to Life March, the Million Man March, Promise Keepers, and the World Bank International Monetary Fund protests. Some of these events have changed our nation, such as when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s Civil Rights March took place on the National Mall. Though many of these First Amendment demonstrations are short-term, some are longer-term vigils. In 1979, 6,000 family farmers drove their tractors to Washington, D.C. to protest American farm policy. They were on the Mall for 7 weeks. A month after Dr. King's assassination, thousands of demonstrators set up a shantytown known as Resurrection City for a month-long vigil here in Washington. In 1985, the Vietnam Veterans Vigil groups began to demonstrate on behalf of servicemen and servicewomen. Rolling Thunder continues that 24-hour vigil to this day. The success of the National Park Service and the U.S. Park Police in managing these demonstrations is directly attributed to our reasoned and measured and progressive response. The NPS and U.S. Park Police handling of First Amendment activities begins with the lowest level of enforcement and then increases if the situation warrants. This strategy ensures the health and safety of the demonstrators as well as D.C. residents and visitors. Courts have recognized that this kind of reasoned and measured technique of law enforcement helps minimize the potential for disorder. The courts have also afforded the NPS a great deal of discretion to enforce rules and regulations in the manner that best fits the situation. In the case of the McPherson Square demonstration, NPS personnel concluded that the activities in the square were protected by the First Amendment and that there were less than 500 demonstrators. Therefore, in accordance to our regulations, no permit is required. NPS regulations do not allow for camping within McPherson Square. However, temporary structures, including tents, are permissible as a part of a demonstration, and a 24-hour round-the-clock vigil is also allowed. From the outset, the NPS has been working with the District of Columbia, including the Metropolitan Police Department, the Departments of Health, Fire, and EMS, to ensure that the demonstrators at McPherson the demonstrations are conducted in a safe and lawful manner. Just this week, we conducted a joint health inspection with the D.C. Department of Health. U.S. Park Police have at all times maintained a law enforcement presence and patrols at McPherson Square in order to protect health and safety of park visitors and the demonstrators, and have taken enforcement action when necessary. The NPS has employed a reasoned, measured, and incremental approach to address regulatory violations that minimize the threats to public safety while protecting First Amendment activities. This process has involved an evolution from outreach and education to formal notices of the rules that govern use of McPherson Square. I want to be clear that we take seriously residents and the district concerns and are constantly monitoring and evaluating conditions in the square. I understand this demonstration has impacted some District of Columbia businesses and visitors alike, and I appreciate their efforts to tolerate this activity. It is important to note that absent an emergency or threat to public or health and safety, demonstrators at McPherson Square must be allowed to continue their vigil in accordance with existing regulations and well-established judicial interpretations of their First Amendment rights. As long as the demonstration continues, however, the NPS will take an enforcement approach that seeks to protect public health and safety while respecting their First Amendment rights. This concludes my statement. I am open to questions.
The Chair would recognize himself for questions at this point. Mr. Jarvis, one reason that I like law enforcement, like Chief Lanier and the other men and women who are in uniform today and everywhere else across the country, is because there really aren't protesters that are Republican or Democrat in their judgment. There aren't laws that are Republican or Democrat. There aren't crime victims that are Republican or Democrat. It's just the law. So what I'm trying to glean is, what is the law? Because whatever you say with respect to McPherson Square is going to have to be applicable everywhere else in this country. So the notion that you think Washington may have special First Amendment privileges, it does not. There are no more First Amendment rights in this town than there are in any other city, town, hamlet in this country. So define camping for me, because you say it's prohibited. Tell me what it is.
Yes, sir. I agree with you that the First Amendment applies everywhere in the United States. It's just that in the District of Columbia, we have more experience with it because we have more protests, we have more First Amendment activities in the district than any other place in the country. And the U.S. Park Police and the National Park Service that manage the National Mall handle hundreds of these kinds of events. And we take exactly the same approach every time, and that is a measured and reasoned response. What's unique about the McPherson Occupy group is that they are disorganized. There is no unit leader that we can go to and negotiate our expectations of their compliance.
Mr. Rivers, I hate to cut you off. I've got 5 minutes. I need a definition of camping, because I need to go back to South Carolina and tell everyone who wants to spend the summer in one of our parks what camping is and what it is not. So define camping for me, juxtaposed with a 24-hour vigil, because you seem inclined to draw a distinction, and I can't draw a distinction. What is the definition of camping?
The distinction is, for a 24-hour vigil, is that they are awake at all times, providing information or signs or whatever associated with their First Amendment activities. Camping is defined as sleeping or preparing to sleep at the site.
Is there sleeping going on in McPherson Square?
Yes, sir, we do believe there is.
Is there preparing to sleep, or are they all insomniacs?
I believe that they are some preparing to sleep.
So you're not drawing a separate First Amendment rule for insomniacs versus narcoleptics?
What I am stating is that we do believe that there is some camping going on at McPherson Square associated with their vigil.
And how much investigation have you done into that?
We are, as I indicated, taking a measured and reasoned approach to this.
See, I don't know what that means. I'm just an old country prosecutor. Measured and reasoned approach doesn't mean anything to me. What means something to me is, can you define camping, because you strictly prohibit it. You just said it's going on. And that's fine. If you want to change the rules, that's fine. Just let me tell my constituents who want to visit D.C. this summer that they can come to any park they want to, and they can bring their tent as long as they say they're protesting. Can I tell them that?
They can bring their tent, absolutely.
And they can stay. They can sleep?
No, they cannot.
Is there sleeping going on at McPherson Square? You said there is. What's the difference?
What I said, and I will continue to say, is that the protesters, the demonstrators, exercising their First Amendment rights, have the rights to be in McPherson Square 24 hours a day. And
so you view them as a unit, and as long as one of them is awake, then that gives constitutional cover for the rest to sleep. Is that the new analysis?
No, I do not say that. What I said is that they, as a group, have the right to be there on a 24-hour vigil. Individuals. The camping regulation is an individual violation, not a group violation.
How many people have been cited for camping?
At this point, none.
Well, you told me people were sleeping.
We are in the process of gaining compliance with the occupiers through a series of ramping up the enforcement at the site to gain compliance. That is the approach we have used with First Amendment activities in this town for decades, and it's been quite successful. And I think in this case,
how long has gaining compliance been going on? When did the movement start in D.C.?
This particular movement began in October.
October, November, December, so 90 days, coming up on 100 days, is that right? How long do you think it will take you to gain compliance?
I hope we're going to gain complete compliance very soon.
No citations for sleeping?
We've issued a lot of other citations, but not particularly for camping.
Well, is that the linchpin of the definition of camping, sleeping?
Sleeping, yes, it is one of the definitions, sleeping or preparing to sleep.
So to prove your ideological neutrality, if the NRA or if the Chamber of Commerce or National Federation of Independent Businesses or anyone associated with the other side wants to come to McPherson Square this afternoon with tents, as long as one person remains vertical, they can stay.
I am ideological neutral on this. I could care less what their cause is. My job as a 35-year veteran of the National Park Service, is to protect the individual's rights under the First Amendment. When each protest,
wait a second. To protect their rights under the First Amendment, is it not also your job to enforce the law?
Absolutely, it's my job.
Is it against the law to camp?
The courts have afforded us a great deal of discretion in how we enforce the law in order to protect the First Amendment. And that's exactly what we're doing.
Do you agree the Supreme Court has said sleeping and camping can be prohibited?
Yes, they can. But at the same time, they gave us the discretion in how and when we implement that regulation.
All right, I'm going to be making sure that anyone who wants to camp throughout the United States, as long as they say they're in protest of something, can do whatever they want in federal parks. And with that, I would recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Davis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I too want to thank our witnesses for their testimony and for being here. Courts have traditionally upheld the right of governments to manage and supervise public property as long as there is a rational basis for the rules and no point of view is being discriminated against. But the very name occupy suggests a constant presence and commitment not to move in the face of perceived injustice. Director Jarvis, let me ask you, due to the length of the vigil, did your office have any special concerns about health and safety?
Congressman, yes, sir. We've been concerned actually the most about health and safety from the very beginning. And we've been working with the District of Columbia to put in place both the systems. For instance, the National Park Service increased the trash collection at McPherson to 3 times a day so that there would not be an accumulation of attraction or distraction at the site.
And your office did work with the park police on an ongoing basis?
Absolutely, yes, sir.
How would you characterize the response of the Occupy D.C. protesters to whatever concerns that might have been expressed to them?
Initially, because there is no one leader there that we could go to and discuss specifically with them our concerns for health and safety, cleanliness at the site, and other concerns. And initially, they were antagonistic to our presence at the site. That has significantly changed through the great work of the U.S. Park Police and our staff within the National Mall. We have developed a rapport at the site. We have gained a great deal of compliance. They notify us when there are concerns, particularly with law enforcement. So I believe that we've made some great inroads.
So then you'd say that they have basically been cooperative after the initial resistance?
Yes, sir.
Are there any benefits to the Occupy D.C. protesters to maintain individuals in a few locations? Is it best that they be concentrated or have the ability to move from one perhaps location or one spot to another?
It is an advantage from a law enforcement standpoint that they are concentrated in one area. That allows us to work directly with the Metro PD to provide around-the-clock law enforcement services at the site rather than being spread across a very large area, as well as the impact to the grass has already happened. And moving to another site would just result in new impacts to one of our other First Amendment sites.
You mentioned your 35 years of service with the Park Service, and obviously you've seen many permits, you've seen many protests, many demonstrations. Have you seen any that have raised the level of concern that Occupy D.C. seem to be raising to the point of a congressional hearing?
This is the first congressional hearing that I've testified related to a First Amendment activity.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman from Illinois. The Chair would now recognize another gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for hosting this hearing. Mr. Jarvis, welcome. And I apologize if I want to pull us back and get some context. It's always so dangerous at hearings because we focus on things we maybe shouldn't be focused on. I want to focus on one very specific notion. There's a statute, I believe, that says camping is illegal. Camping in McPherson Park is against the law. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And in fact, I believe the Park Service handed out a document early on in the Occupy D.C. process to the folks at McPherson Park that I found quite helpful. Spelled out the definition of camping that you and I both agree is not allowed. And it says, I don't have my glasses, but it says that camping is defined as the use of park land for living accommodation purposes, such as sleeping activities or making preparations to sleep, including the laying down of bedding for the purpose of sleeping, or storing personal belongings, or making any fire, or using any tents or shelter, or other structure or vehicle for sleeping, or doing any digging or earth breaking. Mr. Jarvis, based on your own definition of camping, are they camping at McPherson Park?
We believe that there are individuals there that are doing those activities that would result in us seeing that they are camping, yes.
Why have they not been removed? Why has your own statute not been enforced?
Because in each of our First Amendment demonstrations are a little bit unique. And in this one is, let's say, unprecedented in part, in that it has been stated that the core of their First Amendment activity is that they occupy the site. And so as we have approached this, how we are trying to manage this activity and provide our first goal in the National Park Service in allowing and providing for First Amendment activities is the health and safety of the community and the demonstrators themselves. And we felt that going in right away in enforcing the regulations against camping could potentially incite a reaction on their part that would result in possible injury or property damage.
But Mr. Jarvis, again, and I appreciate the candor in the answer. You've acknowledged that they're camping. You've acknowledged there are individuals in McPherson Park breaking the law. And they've been there since October. So it's not like 3 or 4 months later now you've been too quick to enforce the law. They've been there 4 months. We're not even yet getting into many of the other issues that the city is having to deal with. And again, nobody up here, Republican or Democrat, I don't think anybody in this hearing room questions at all their right to protest. That's not what this hearing's about. You're not enforcing your own statute. Who's telling you, and I know this isn't you, who's telling you not to enforce the statute? It's not your job to determine which protest group, how to treat protest groups differently. They're breaking the law. Why aren't you enforcing that law? It's been 4 months.
Well, all of our decisions related to the way that this particular protest has been handled has been made on the ground, first and foremost, by our U.S. Park Police officers and commanders in terms of what law enforcement, I served as a law enforcement officer. Law enforcement officers are granted a great deal of discretion in terms of how they enforce and what they enforce and when they enforce.
Mr. Jarvis, my time's running out. Are there some political sensitivities at play here that is sort of preventing you all from enforcing the law?
Absolutely not.
Are you getting any sort of advice or orders from people above you?
I am regularly briefing the Secretary of Interior, as would be expected under any issue that faces the National Park Service. But I am not taking direction on this, on how the site should be handled.
And Mr. Chairman, I'll close with this because I see my time's running out. I had a staff member visit McPherson Park last night just to sort of learn from our own what's going on. And obviously what we found out seconds your opinion, that folks are sleeping. They are camping. And I appreciate your candor, and I don't think this is your decision. I appreciate that. The city of Washington, D.C. is at a breaking point right now, and I'm just really curious as to why people above you don't let you enforce the law. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman from Illinois. The chair will now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings.
First of all, I want to thank all of you for your testimony, and Mr. Jarvis, I just want to thank you for using your discretion. As a child starting at 9 years old, I started participating in protests just to get some rights. And I realized what a delicate balance it can be when you've got people together who are frustrated and who are very, very sensitive, and you, while trying to protect the health and safety, it must become difficult at times to try to figure out where that balance is, but obviously you've done a very good job of dealing with it. At the same time, you know, sitting here, I was just listening to the last questioner. You know, our law enforcement people and our park people and our government folk who have to carry out these very difficult tasks, it's easy for us to sit up here and second guess the people who are on the ground, like Chief Lanier and others. But the fact is that you are the ones who have to deal with this on a day-to-day basis. And so I appreciate your discretion. I appreciate you understanding that something could get out of hand. I appreciate the idea that it's not about, I mean, everybody just assumes, you know, that the implication just a moment ago, which I would find very insulting, is that you do your job, you did your job using the discretion that the courts have given you. The implication was that somebody's telling you what to do and how to do it. That's not true, is it? I mean, in other words, you make your best judgment. Is that true?
That's correct, sir.
And so Chairman Issa claims that the NPS has allowed protesters to damage the park significantly, and that the NPS took no action until the protesters attempted to build a wooden structure. Is it fair to say that the NPS neglected to do some duty at any time since the Occupy protests began?
No, sir. I believe we have taken exactly the appropriate approach from the very beginning in terms of attempting to contact and develop a understanding of the expectations and desires and intentions of the occupiers at the site. Because, again, they did not have a central leader, then most of this work has been done through observation. Since we didn't have someone to hand the flyers that were indicated before, we posted them at the site and worked towards gaining their compliance, their voluntary compliance and expectations at the site from the very beginning. We told them that permanent structures were not going to be allowed, and when they attempted to put up the permanent structure, we did move in and remove it. And I want to compliment the U.S. Park Police on the handling of that. If you remember, the press was quite good. And actually, we received even compliments from the demonstrators in terms of the way that was handled.
What was the significance of the attempt to build a wooden structure? What was the significance of that?
I'm not really sure what their intention was, but they had been well informed that we would not allow a permanent structure.
And why would that trigger a response?
Well, they were going to build something on the site. I mean, this is a national park unit, and temporary structures are allowed under the First Amendment in support of their protest, but not permanent structures.
So there comes a point where discretion ends and then you have to act. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
So I would take it that the wooden structure would be a clear signal that you had to do something.
Yes, sir. It was essentially viewed as an escalation of their occupation of the site. So we felt that it was time to step in and remove that.
And so whether this would, no matter what group this might have been, whether they were protesting right, left, far right, far left, it wouldn't have made any difference. You would have carried it out that way. Is that right?
Yes, sir. That is absolutely right.
And you said that this is a kind of unique situation. I guess, have you ever seen anything like this in your 35 years?
Well, we do have long-term vigils on the mall. As I indicated, the Vietnam War Vigil that takes place at the Vietnam Memorial near the Lincoln has been going on since the 80s. We have had other long-term protests, such as the tractor farmers workers that came in that were here for multiple weeks, occupying sites on the mall.
Again, I want to thank you for your 35 years of service.
I thank the gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you, sir.
Chair would now recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Dr. Desjardins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jarvis, do you feel like you're doing a good job handling this matter?
Yes, sir, I do.
Okay. Do you think it's necessary that we're here today to discuss this?
I have no opinion on that.
Why wouldn't you have an opinion?
You know that I'm a big believer in the three branches of government, and I believe the legislative branch has its rights, as does the executive branch.
Well, when do you suspect that this problem will be resurrected or reconciled? We're all here today. This is time-consuming. It's obviously important that we're here. I'm not sure you think it's important that we're here. But when can we count on you to have this problem solved so we don't have to have meetings like this?
Well, we are planning very soon, I cannot give you a specific date, to begin the enforcement of the camping regulation. We feel it is, we have given them plenty of time to come into compliance. We've given them plenty of warning. We're about to give them one more warning and recognition and notice, and then we will be enforcing the camping regulation.
Do you think that's the way it's handled across the country at various state parks, that if somebody wants to go in there, not pay their fee, set up a tent, and say they're protesting, that that's okay, that they can have about 100 days to sort that out?
Each of our First Amendment activities in places across the country are handled on a site-by-site, case-by-case basis.
And you think this one's being handled appropriately?
I do, sir.
Chief Lanier, is this costing the taxpayer any money as far as additional police force being brought in to handle problems?
We're using for the most part, we're using our Special Operations Division that normally handles protest on a daily basis, but we have had to pull overtime officers from the patrol districts and hold officers over so we don't have an impact in the community. So there has been a cost.
Are there people breaking laws that you're aware of?
And I know there's been arrests at the site by park police, and we've made some arrests out on the D.C. public space.
Okay. Is it patrolled at night if some citizen just wanted to walk through the park? Do you feel it's safe? You know, there's been allegations that there's improper use of toilet facilities, and I guess that would mean maybe going to the bathroom where you're not supposed to. If somebody did that out here on any of the other grasslands around the Capitol or near the White House, I assume they'd be arrested?
On D.C. public space, it is prohibited.
Okay. And so that's a problem that's going on in McPherson Park?
I would defer to Dr. Akhtar, who's done the walkthrough, but it's my understanding that there has been some issues with that, yes.
Okay. So it seems like if everybody was doing their job, we wouldn't be here today. If there's laws being broken and people were being arrested and these problems were being resolved as they happened, it shouldn't take 100 days to fix that problem.
Well, I can sympathize a little bit with the process of getting gradual compliance, because you have to do that and then deal with the courts in that case. So I can sympathize a bit with the responses we've had to take with demonstrations in the city in the past.
Dr. Akhtar, what do you feel are the health risks for not just the people protesting, but just average citizens that want to use the facility? Are their rights being infringed upon?
I, again, appreciate the opportunity. Health risks are real. to the protesters themselves and to the people at large. And I say this is not only because of the sanitary conditions that exist in the park, but also because people go back and forth. The virus, the bacteria, and the others don't know any boundaries. There are homeless people in the mix who may have infectious disease. And so that really creates an environment that's not healthy, not only for the protesters, but for the residents and rest of us who are visiting or live in the city.
Okay. So you feel that it's unsafe, the situation that has arisen here over the past 3 months?
It's a high-risk situation that's in the center of our city. And I think, with all due respect to my colleagues here from the federal government, I think the big issue is lack of clarity on jurisdiction.
Okay.
Federal government has a jurisdiction over the area. If they are allowed to stay, we better provide them the facilities and services that are needed for them to be healthy and for the community to be healthy.
And who should pay for that?
I think if the federal land, the federal government should pay for it.
Oh, so the taxpayer should pay for it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Somebody has to pay for these things. If we are allowing people to stay, my question is, this is nation's capital. We are the United States of America. And people are living in suboptimal conditions where they're putting themselves at risk and they're putting the rest of the community at risk. And nobody is really taking full responsibility for providing the services to them. So it falls by default on D.C. government for us to step in and try to do the things, try to do the cleanup after the fact, whereas there need to be the facilities right on the front end. If these people are going to stay any length of the time, I submit to you all that we provide them the services that they need so they could be healthy and they should not pose any risk to our community.
And the point is that there's laws being broken. We've established that today. There's camping laws being broken. People are violating laws about urinating on Capitol property. But Mr. Jarvis doesn't think there's a problem here, and he thinks he's doing a good job. And I think maybe we all shouldn't be sitting here today if everybody was doing their job. So clearly, we've got a little bit of work to do. I'm out of time. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman from Tennessee. The Chair would now recognize the gentlelady from the District of Columbia, Ms. Holmes Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are legitimate questions being raised here, and the District of Columbia, federal government have always cooperated well in order to handle them. These questions go to safety and health, but they also go to First Amendment rights. I want to register my objection that the Occupy that there is no Occupy representative here. The chairman of this full committee said he thinks they should be heard. Well, there would be no better place for them to be heard but at a hearing concerning their alleged actions. This would be the place. This is not a country where we talk about people and don't invite them to defend themselves. Now I want to congratulate the Park Police, the National Park Service.
Would the gentlelady yield?
If the time can be,
I'll be brief.
If I can recover my time,
of course
I would then yield to the chairman.
I'd ask unanimous consent. I have 30 seconds to engage in a colloquy.
Without objection.
I thank the gentleman. Madam, the best way I can put this is, this hearing, at least from my view, was intended to be about what would happen with the next group of protesters now that we have set a 4-month precedent. Although within the committee's jurisdiction, if the gentlelady and the ranking member would like to have a minority day and have the other side come in and talk about why they camped and why that should be allowed and why 400 other protests per year should be allowed similarly, you're certainly welcome to. But I would hope that you heard in my opening, this is narrow. We are not talking about this group. We're talking about the next group and the group after of how we're going to protect the District of Columbia from, if you will, having lots of these kinds of events. I thank the gentleman. Yield back.
Well, I thank the gentleman. We're aware of our rights for minority hearing. The place to be heard is at this hearing, of course, because if we want to know what to do about the next group, the best way to understand that is to hear from all involved with this protest, not with only law enforcement officials or the officials of the federal government. Now, I want to thank the police, the various police departments for their approach to seeking compliance. If the District of Columbia wants to have some problems, if the park police, in fact, had not engaged in the kind of ramping down to get compliance, then you would have had big time involvement of the D.C. Police Department. Mr. Kwanda, are you aware that for years now, indeed for the 10 years since 9/11, I have been able to get an annual appropriation from the federal government that allows the District of Columbia to draw down the costs of demonstrations like the Occupy demonstration?
Yes, I am aware.
Have you drawn down any of that money?
Money is being requested.
So this is not costing the District of Columbia funds. If that money is drawn down, it can be paid for as it is always paid for, because this is the nation's capital. And while the chairman of the subcommittee is right that there's no preference in First Amendment rights, there is a deep sensitivity for how to enforce those rights at the seat of government. Have there been residents coming forward in significant numbers to complain about the presence of Occupy in our city?
There have been a number of residents.
In large or significant numbers?
We have received a number of emails and residents coming down.
Is it not true that the District of Columbia, the mayor and the city council, while they have raised concerns about health and safety matters, and the mayor has asked for some change in where the occupation is taking place, that neither the mayor nor the city council have asked that these demonstrators be removed from Washington, D.C.?
The mayor has not made that request.
Isn't it true, Mr. Apter, that in your, to read from your testimony, with your concern about disease and the rest, no, this is Mr. Kwanda's testimony, although there have not been any public health emergencies, such as outbreaks of communicable disease or reported illnesses, we will remain vigilant in monitoring. So your vigilance, of course, which will be paid for by the federal government, is what we're concerned about. But Mr. Kwanda, in his own testimony, says that whatever have been the health problems, and there surely have been some, they have not presented major problems. Mr. Kwanda, when you use the word escalating tactics, have you seen escalating tactics, or have you seen just the opposite? An outbreak here and there, the occupiers get themselves together, quieted down themselves, and keep the matter from escalating. Hasn't that been the pattern, rather than escalating tactics?
What I've said in my testimony is that our concern is for escalating tactics, that history has shown.
Just a moment. This is a fact-finding hearing. Isn't it the case that there have not been escalating tactics? Shouldn't we give these demonstrators their due, that there has been cooperation with the police, and instead of escalating tactics, they have self-policed their movement? No. And isn't that the model we would like to see when demonstrators come to this city?
That is the model that we would like to see.
Mr. Chairman, the occupiers, when I saw them, you know, I come up from a generation that tried a new tactic too. It's a new tactic that changed the United States of America. Nobody much wanted it, and when Resurrection City was out there and it was raining cats and dogs, and there was mud during the civil rights protests, nobody said that because of your health, we're going to get you out of this place. So I think it is incumbent upon us to respect the different tactics of different generations. And let me say this as somebody who has deep respect, represents the city, has deep respect for the First Amendment first and foremost. What Mr. Zick said is very important to understand about the First Amendment and its enforcement. When you see me protecting First Amendment rights here, do understand that you are hearing it from a member who spent the first part of her life as a constitutional lawyer protecting demonstrators, many of whom I disagreed with including a case in the Supreme Court where I argued in face of a set of racists who wanted to continue their protest. The First Amendment knows no advantage. The Tea Party people would get the same respect, and I am confident the same kind of treatment from the federal government and the Park Service that they have gotten here. And it's up to the District of Columbia and its services to adhere to the First Amendment as well as anybody else. You are very fortunate that we've been able to get you the funds so that this does not cost the city a dime. Her overtime will be paid for, and it is important that the rights be seen in those contexts, and that there continue to be, and indeed must be, even greater cooperation between the Park Service and the District of Columbia, because guess what? Neither one of you are going anywhere, and the demonstrators are going to continue to come. And this committee expects grown-up responses, as we have gotten from the mayor of the District of Columbia and the council of the District of Columbia, from all of its officials, as well as from the Park Service. And I yield back the remainder of my time.
I thank the gentlelady from the District of Columbia. The chair would now recognize the chairman of the full committee, the gentleman from California, Mr. Issa.
Thank you, and I ask unanimous consent that the 3 additional minutes the gentlelady from the district took be allowed.
Without objection, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. You know, my obligation as the chairman of this committee is first and foremost for the District of Columbia to ensure that we do no harm to the district. And I'm not for a moment going to side with the gentlelady, the delegate from the district, my friend Eleanor, and say that just because we let you draw down on a payment that we're not harming you. I think we are. I certainly think that when the mayor of the city sent to Mr. Jarvis a letter simply at the end saying, at a minimum, the occupied D.C. sites at McPherson Square and Freedom Plaza must be consolidated at Freedom Plaza to allow for elimination of the rat infestation, cleanup, and restoration of McPherson Square. Now, that's the District of Columbia that gentlelady represents and that I'm honored to have oversight of. I'm afraid many of you didn't get an answer, but Doctor, first with you. Is that a problem that legitimately the district has a responsibility, needs to make sure occurs, that is not occurring today?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not quite sure. Mr. Chairman, I'm not quite sure. You know, the issue of jurisdiction has not been settled.
I was actually talking about the rat question.
So the rat, no jurisdiction. You know, they never asked D.C. permit to cross from the park.
But it's impacting residents of the District of Columbia until it's cleaned up, right?
That's why you know we are involved in this process, and nobody supports more the First Amendment right of the people than I do. I've taken oath twice. Once becoming a citizen to uphold the Constitution, and other time becoming the Director of Health for the city. We support that, but people must be healthy to be able to stand up, be heard, and be seen. If they're living in rat-infested places, that's putting them at risk and putting our residents at risk. This is no demonstration of their First Amendment right.
Thank you. I think you've made your point very clearly, and I appreciate your having an opportunity to do that. I might point out that the ranking member representing Baltimore represents a city that handcuffed Occupy Baltimore protesters, as did New York when they were trespassing. Ms. Jarvis, you are the focus here because you are, in fact, turning a blind eye to 4 months of law breaking. Now, you mentioned your background in law enforcement, and I appreciate that there is discretion. But do you have discretion to ignore overtly criminal activity, or do you have discretion to concentrate on the most egregious, to prioritize? Which is it? And I don't ask you for a third answer if you don't mind.
We have the discretion to focus on the most egregious, which we've made over 80 arrests there.
Okay, so you're focusing on the subpart, but for 4 months saying, well, we'll focus on people who commit criminal activities beyond the core criminal activity that led to those arrests, right?
We have focused on crimes against individuals, public urination, and those types of crimes at the site.
Okay. Now, in your opening statement, you talked about a First Amendment balance. Is, in fact, somebody sleeping in a tent a legitimate First Amendment part of a protest? Yes or no, please?
No, it is not.
So, in fact, the moment somebody begins sleeping in a tent, basically using somebody else's asset, the American people's asset, in a way not prescribed or allowed within the regulations set about for all citizens, at the moment that they do that, they're committing a crime which you have an obligation to enforce. How many enforcement actions have you taken over people who have ceased protesting or simply camping there?
To this date, we have taken none.
And I'll ask you the rhetorical question I noticed when I made my opening statement you wrote down. Are there parks in America in which park rangers usher people out of all or part of the park at sunset because, in fact, there are often designated camping areas and there are areas of the park you simply can't be in all night?
Yeah, I believe that probably is true. I can't tell you specifically where that might be the case, but certainly there are areas in our national parks that are closed at certain times of the day.
And that's for a number of reasons, including the conservation of assets. Sometimes it's just plain money. You guard the campgrounds 24 hours a day. You don't guard all of very large federal lands, right?
No, we try to extend our enforcement responsibilities throughout. Most of our national parks, though, I do want to correct you on this, though, because it's an important point, that most of our national parks are open 365 days a year, 24 hours a day.
For camping?
We have areas that are specifically identified for camping, and then we do have areas that camping is prohibited.
I'd ask that we have an additional 2 minutes.
Without objection.
Thank you. So in those facilities, and I'm an avid camper, both RV and tent over the years, and an very old Boy Scout, basically it is a regular practice of the park, any park, federal park, that first of all they check to see if somebody's allowed to be a camper, because you limit the number of campers, and people who simply want to exceed that, they're ushered out, and to ensure that people are camping within lawfully designated areas, correct?
That's correct.
And yet for some reason there's been an exception here. Let me ask you the most important question I hopefully rightly on the side of the District of Columbia. Can we expect additional exceptions like this in the future? Is this a one-time occurrence that we're going to bring to an end once and for all? Or is there an expectation that this or any administration can pick and choose based on whether they like or don't like the First Amendment rights being asserted and allow some to stay and others to go? Or are we going to uniformly simply say if you're a protester, you get to stay on federal lands while you're protesting?
The answer is that each First Amendment activity is going to be approached with the same set of principles.
Okay, so camping is not a First Amendment activity. Camping is, in fact, a violation of the law. The sleeping is a violation of the law. And if protesters choose to camp, you and the Obama administration will make a case-by-case decision about whether or not you agree with the protesters' line, whether or not this group of protesters get to stay and others get to leave. That's really what you're saying, isn't it?
No, I'm not saying that. Whatever they're protesting about is irrelevant to our decisions. Our decisions are based on the totality of the circumstances.
In the history of the Park Service here in the Federal Government, how many times have protesters been allowed to stay in campgrounds when it was clearly an unlawful activity, to your knowledge, and been allowed to consider it a First Amendment event by the Park Service?
Within my testimony, I specified at least 3. When the farm workers movement came here, they lived on the mall for 7 weeks. I indicated in Resurrection City, they were here for at least a month on the mall. So we do not pick and choose. Each one is the totality of the circumstances. And then our goal here, from the beginning as well as the end, is to gain compliance of all of our regulations. It's been an incremental enforcement, and we intend to gain complete compliance with this group as well, in particular, as it relates to camping.
And Mr. Zick, as the minority's chosen witness, they didn't choose the people sitting behind you. They chose you to speak on their behalf when asked who they wanted. Do you agree that incremental and selective and periodic and some get it and some don't is okay under the Constitution?
As I said, you've got to be very careful with viewpoint discrimination, but I will say this with respect to camping, there is a world of difference between a recreational camper and somebody who camps as part of a protest. The Supreme Court did not say camping is not a First Amendment activity. It said the opposite. What it did say was the government had the authority to limit or prohibit, in Clark versus CCNV, that activity. So I don't join issue with whether or not the camping regulation has been enforced here, but I take your point. It cannot be enforced against some groups and not others when they're exercising First Amendment rights because the government agrees or disagrees with the message. That is true.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for focusing on this, and hopefully we're bringing some resolution. I think we heard here today that the protesters are, in fact, being given notice, and a foreseeable period of time, very short period of time will pass before they will have to find other accommodations and protest only during the day. I yield back.
Yes, sir. I thank the gentleman from California. The Chair would now recognize the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Clay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And normally I would say thank you for this hearing, but the tone and tenure, I'm not going to say that. The tone and the tenure of this hearing is rather disturbing. Now, I visited an Occupy camp in St. Louis, my hometown, Keener Plaza. I found it to be orderly, organized, very sanitary. I went inside some tents, and they had computers set up and all of that. It was very organized. So I didn't experience what you say you've experienced here in D.C. But the tone and tenure of this hearing is on the wrong track. When we talk about peaceful assemblage in this country, I think back to being a very small child in the summer of 1963 and seeing the images come across my TV of those who peacefully assembled in Birmingham, Alabama, and were met by Bull Connor with dogs and fire hoses. He was wrong then, and I think that the majority is wrong on this instance. When you think about our First Amendment rights for all Americans to be able to assemble peacefully, to voice their concerns about issues in this country, we should not try to tamp that down. We should not try to distinguish between one form of assemblage to another. And let me ask, former Secretary of Labor Robert Wright described the message of the Occupy movement this way. And he says, if there's a single core message to the Occupy movement, is that the increasing concentration of income and wealth at the top endangers our democracy. With money comes political power. Yet, when people without money assemble to express their dissatisfaction with all this, they are told the First Amendment doesn't apply. Instead, they are treated as public nuisances, clubbed, pepper sprayed, thrown out of public parks, and evicted from public spaces. Professor Zick, are government agencies like the Park Service limited in what steps they may take to contain a protest by their legal obligation to uphold the First Amendment rights of the protesters?
They are.
My understanding is that the seminal federal case, Quaker Action versus Morton, is decades old. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
Is there anything new about that obligation or about Occupy D.C. that would make the Park Service's recent decisions out of line with decades of past practice?
There's nothing new in the jurisprudence. I think what's new and what people have been pointing out is quite new is the use of this kind of a protest or demonstration to make a public point, to join a public debate. The use of public place in this fashion is, I think, unprecedented. The closest thing, I suppose, would be a sit-in. This is a large outdoor sit-in activity that does pose some stress for public concerns of safety and health and so forth. But there's nothing in the jurisprudence that's changed since Quaker Action in the 1970s, no.
And this is just another form of peaceful assemblage of Americans protesting what they think is wrong and having a voice in their government. Is that correct?
To the extent it's peaceable assembly, and to the extent it's not, as we've heard testimony, the criminal laws are being enforced.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I yield the balance of my time to the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Jarvis, let me again thank the Park Police that there has not been escalation, in part because of how the occupiers have conducted themselves, but also because the Park Police have done very expert policing to ramp down the problems and to get enforcement. We want more of that because we do not want the city torn up by demonstrators. Let me ask you, Mr. Jarvis, has the bulk of the police work been done by the Park Police rather than the District of Columbia Police?
In the case of the site itself, McPherson Square, the U.S. Park Police, National Park Service.
So the daily policing has not been a matter for the city, but the federal government has in fact been doing the daily policing for the most part.
Yes, ma'am.
Have you been in touch with, in light of Dr. Apter's concern about permitting rats, have you been in touch with the Public Health Service or Mr. Apter in the District of Columbia Public Health Service, and if they at all, sir?
Yes, ma'am. The Public Health Service Corps works for the National Park Service. Captain Chuck Higgins has been working directly with the district on a public health review of the site. So
they are cooperating on the public. So you believe that they will get any matters involving public health under control because of cooperation between the federal and the district governments on public health matters?
Yes, ma'am, I do believe that.
And do you agree, Dr. Apter, as well?
Yeah, we have started the communication. There has been one meeting between Captain Chuck Higgins and myself, and we have discussed the issues and mutually agreed that action needs to be taken to make sure that the site is cleaned up and it's healthy for the protesters and our residents.
I thank the gentlelady from the District of Columbia and the gentleman from Missouri. The Chair would now recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. McHenry.
Well, I thank the Chairman, and I'd like to yield the balance of my time to the Chairman so he can continue his line of questioning from earlier.
I thank the gentleman from North Carolina. Professor Jarvis, I know that you are an expert in research. Do you also teach criminal process or constitutional law? I'm sorry, Professor Zick.
I'm sorry, the question again?
Are you familiar with criminal process and constitutional law?
I teach constitutional law.
What is selective prosecution?
Singling out of an individual for prosecution on some sort of invidious basis.
Could it also include a misuse of your prosecutorial discretion?
I suppose. Now we're getting far afield in my expertise. Constitutional law.
Well, mine too. So you're the professor.
Okay. Not necessarily criminal procedure, but it certainly could.
Well, it seems clear that you can't enforce or not enforce based on content. Would you also agree you can't enforce or not enforce based on geography or jurisdiction?
I'm not sure I understand in what sense.
Is there a different First Amendment rule for the District of Columbia than there is for Utah?
I think there is a heightened sensitivity, and in part for this reason. If you have a right to petition the Federal Government, you can do that far more effectively from 2 blocks from the White House than you can from Cleveland.
So you think that there would be a different First Amendment analysis based on where you are in this country?
I'm not sure it would be a different First Amendment analysis, but as someone put it, there would be a heightened sensitivity to the First Amendment right in question. The doctrine would not change.
Well, that creates a very curious result. The closer you get to the District of Columbia, you have more First Amendment rights.
I don't know that you have more First Amendment rights, but the D.C. Circuit in particular has recognized that given, again, the location, proximity to the situs of government, the seat of government, there is a special sensitivity for First Amendment.
Well, this isn't the only seat of government. There are 50 capitals, aren't there?
Yes, sir.
There are thousands of county seats. So you're not arguing that because this is the seat of the Federal Government that it would have more First Amendment rights than the capital of Nevada, are you?
I'm not arguing necessarily there are more First Amendment rights, but in the balance that courts undertake in terms of balancing free speech rights against other concerns, I think it's appropriate to take that into account, and I think some courts have, in fact, done that, the D.C. Circuit chief among them.
Well, I want you to balance this. Mr. Jarvis, have there been any arrest for camping in the country in the last 12 months?
I have no idea.
What do you think?
I would not like to speculate on that. I really don't. I mean, the National Park Service is a big place.
Right. So it only I mean, and let me say, Mr. Cummings, it was entirely correct to commend you for your 35 years of service. In a former life, I actually had the pleasure of prosecuting some of y'all's cases in South Carolina.
Thank you.
And my fear is this. I understand you're in a difficult position. I really do. My fear is this, that if someone in South Carolina or Georgia or Utah or Maryland is going to be charged with camping, it makes it really difficult to say that we are one nation under the law if you have different applications of the law based on where you are. So I think you and I both, if we looked hard enough, could find someone who was arrested and prosecuted for camping. And to Professor Zick's point that there is something called selective prosecution, I'd be curious how we explain to that person who paid a fine or perhaps was incarcerated what the difference is.
I think that, as the professor indicated, recreational camping is different than First Amendment activities that include a 24-hour vigil.
Well, is there First Amendment sleeping versus recreational sleeping?
In this case, we have a 24-hour vigil, which we do believe.
That actually wasn't my question. Is there First Amendment sleeping versus recreational sleeping?
I don't really understand that question. So
well, here's the question. Here's the question. You've already said that sleeping is prohibited because it is one of the examples of camping. You also said people are sleeping at McPherson Square. My question is, are there certain constitutionally protected forms of sleeping, or are you admitting that you have selectively prosecuted certain people and not others?
No, I'm not admitting in terms of selective prosecution. What I am saying is that we have gained compliance through an incremental approach. And the important point here is that sleeping and camping is an individual regulation. It's against an individual, not a group.
How does a group sleep? I mean, that's an
so there is no regulation that we can apply towards Occupy D.C. on camping. There is a camping regulation that we need to build a body of evidence around an actual individual, a person with a name, that they are camping at McPherson. And it is our intent to do that. But we have done that at the end of a long progression of gaining compliance and health and safety first.
Well, Mr. Jarvis, I won't say again, Mr. Cummings was right. You have a very difficult job. I knew that actually before he said it, but he's to be commended for saying it again, as everyone on both sides has said. You have a difficult job. Just like Ms. Holmes Norton had a very difficult job when she had to defend someone whose speech she disagreed with. That would be a very challenging thing to do. My concern isn't today. It isn't this movement. It isn't what's happening in Washington. My concern is the fabric of this republic is going to unravel if we treat people differently. It is unraveling because there's a perception that we treat people differently. So if you can guarantee me that the exact same thing would happen in Utah or South Carolina, or if people who had a conservative ideology came to McPherson Square, I would still say this: either enforce the regulation or do away with it. But to have a regulation and not enforcement undermines respect for the rule of law. I think there has been a request for a second round of questions. Mr. Davis, are you amenable to that?
Yes, sir.
Would it suit if we had an abbreviated 3 minutes as opposed to 5?
I think that would work for most of the committee.
With that, I guess I was finishing out Mr. McHenry's time. I don't want to monopolize it. I would, on my side, either Mr. McHenry, Mr. Walsh. All right. Well, I'm going to give it to Mr. Walsh because I have been talking too much.
And I'll be brief. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jarvis, let me just second what the Chairman just said. I respect the job you have, and I understand what you're going through. You said one thing in the first line of questioning that's eaten at me, and maybe I misinterpreted it. You said that because the word occupy was in the name of this protest group, you were treating them a little differently. Was that right?
No, if I could correct the record on that, let me just say that each First Amendment protest has its unique components. In this particular one, as has been stated by the professor, their principle behind their First Amendment activity is to, quote, unquote, occupy a piece of public land.
Which is giving you a bit more discretion in how you deal with that.
Let's say a bit more of a challenge in how we deal with it.
Okay. And so if I had a group that was live in D.C., would you let me live there for a couple years? Or would you have more discretion with how you would deal with me if the name of my group was live in D.C.? See what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying, but I don't think the name is, I'm not using it, let's say, with a capital O. I'm using it as in terms of a verb. They're occupying the site. And any protest that comes to Washington, D.C. with First Amendment rights has to be evaluated in terms of how we deal with them to gain compliance. And that's this one, as we said, it's unprecedented. We're working our way through this.
Thank you, Mr. Driver. Hey, Mr. Chairman, with your indulgence, we had staff last night pay a visit to Occupy D.C. With your permission, I'd love to show just a 2-minute video. I think it seconds a lot of what Mr. Jarvis has said as far as them camping and sleeping.
Without objection.
We're here in Occupy Wall Street, Washington, D.C. What square are we in?
This is McPherson.
McPherson Square. All right, sounds good. And then we've got a bunch of other occupiers. How long have you been here?
Been here since October 3rd.
October 3rd. So you've been here for 4 months. So there's got to be, what, like 50, 60 people staying here?
No, most likely probably about 100 now.
100, okay. Who was, like, the most? How many, when was, like, when this first started?
Summertime, it was around about close to 200.
200.
Not like talk and conjugate right in this general area, because a lot of people right around here all have to wake up early tomorrow morning to go to the hearing.
Well, these two.
Has the National Park Service been accommodating?
You know, for the most part, yeah. Actually, the Park Service has defended our right to be here.
We did have lights on, but somebody came in here and ran wires to the pole because they had a TV, stereo, heater.
They had electric
and
put up to the pole. Wow.
The police seen the cables running across the ground and pulled them.
Yeah.
And put all the lights out, didn't they? They got them turned back on again. And they did it again, so this time.
But they're generally, the Park Service, pretty nice. I mean, they're...
Yeah, they bring us trash bags. And we all get together and...
Did they come and, like, lay out the law, like, kind of talk about what the hell
they had signs up at each entrance.
Okay.
So you can go by the rules.
Wow. Look at that. Wow. That is... And you were saying the Park Service has been pretty... They're helpful. Obviously, you guys got porta potties and stuff like that.
Yeah, we got porta potties over there. We got 3 of them.
Okay.
One big one and 2 little ones. We had 5 of them, but they came and took 2. They come Wednesdays. No, they come Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays.
And what do they do for you?
They clean them out.
Oh, okay.
We also got a fountain where you can wash your hands and everything.
Okay.
You step on it, just pump.
Okay. The Park Service does that. And do they also, they were mentioning they do like health services and stuff for you guys too?
Yeah.
Okay.
We got a truck that's like a big motorhome they call it.
Have you seen any rats when you're sleeping there at all? Or?
You might, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe one might shoot out here after a while. I've been calling them, I've been naming them. I've been naming them. When I see one come out, I say, they go, John, look at them running.
I'd like to invite my brothers and sisters from all over the nation who've been kicked out of their own occupations. Please feel free to come on down to D.C. Our doors are wide open. We'd love to have you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman from Illinois. The chair would now recognize the other gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Davis.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Director Jarvis, let me ask, how do you distinguish between D.C. Occupy protesters and homeless people who might find their way into McPherson Square?
This has been a concern, Congressman, that we do believe some homeless people have moved in to join the occupiers and had taken advantage of the situation there, both in terms of the services. That's one reason we've been working with Metropolitan Health Department to provide social services at the site as well. And I think they have been subject to some of the arrests that we have made at the site for a variety of activities. But it is a concern.
Well, I'm delighted to know that there are some homeless people who have joined the Occupy protesters. But let me ask you, you have, in your testimony and in response to inquiry today, you've mentioned a number of times that there were other long-term vigils, veterans, farmers. Did they go to hotels, to your knowledge, when they were there? How did they maintain themselves? I mean, did they come out during the day and then in the evening go down to the Grand Hyatt someplace and get a room and sleep and then come back the next day and get on their tractors?
They maintain 24-hour vigils in each of those situations. I'm not knowledgeable enough about those actual protests to give any details as to how they managed all of that activity.
Then it would be fair to suggest that perhaps these protesters, Occupy D.C., are handled no differently than what other long-term vigil protesters have been treated.
I think that's correct. Yes, sir.
Well, let me thank you very much, because the more I listen to this discussion and the more I hear what has taken place and what has taken place, the more I'm convinced that your 35 years of law enforcement have served you well, that you've made some solid, sound, rational decisions, and you really represent the best of what law enforcement ought to be. I commend you, and I commend the Park Service for the way in which you've handled a very difficult situation, and that you really understand what it means to have freedom of speech, First Amendment protected. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman from Illinois. The Chair would now recognize the gentleman from California, the Chairman of the full committee, Mr. Issa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I apologize, we had a vote next door in Judiciary. So as I come back, I've got just a couple of quick questions. Mr. Jarvis, we've had a lot of debate about the past, the future. At times, protesters have come to the city, they've camped, and they've been in some way accommodated. You made that point in your opening statement. Have there been times in which protesters came, they camped, and they were not accommodated?
I really can't. I have no information on that. I don't know.
That was the subject of today's hearing. You came not knowing if Park Police had ever arrested somebody who asserted that they were a protester, and you said, that's nice, but you can't camp here?
I'm sorry, I don't have that, but I'd be absolutely glad to find out and come back to the committee with that information.
We'd appreciate an answer for the record.
Yes.
Mr. Zick, this is a constitutional question to a great extent, and this is not the Constitutional Committee. This is the D.C. Committee more than anything else. If we were to make it clear in the future through some statute, in addition to the Supreme Court decision, that protesters would not be accommodated unless that area was either permitted for by a request and a permit, and therefore, obviously, porta potties, all the other facilities, which we do for various demonstrators, even if they're not staying the night, or, in fact, they stayed at a facility that was already allowed. In other words, if we made it clear in statute that it was not discretionary, and we did so uniformly by statute, would that pass the smell test of there are plenty of places to protest, but you can't sleep there, it's not a constitutional question? In other words, your testimony today and this problem, isn't ambiguity to a certain extent a problem?
Well, the regulation as it's written calls for a determination based on the totality about whether or not it's reasonably apparent that people are using it as a living accommodation. So that's lawyer speak for this is ambiguous, but also it's open to discretionary enforcement. With respect to whether you can write new rules in response to a protest, that could be problematic. They've tried that in some other jurisdictions in response to Occupy protests, I believe in Nashville. And the courts found that to be problematic. But if you wrote a statute or a law that was...
And we are talking about not for this particular group of protests, but for the future, for those that will come for issues not yet at the forefront.
If you're talking about that, and if you write and enforce the law in content-neutral terms, then to use your language, Mr. Chairman, it would pass the First Amendment smell test, certainly.
Okay. Well, let me couch the final question from me for today for each of you. Would that be helpful that in a post-protest period, I'm not talking about this week or next week when everyone would view it related to a particular group, would this be helpful? I'll start with the Park Service and come the other way. Would this be helpful for you to have predictability and certainty for the future? Mr. Jarvis.
Well, I think first and foremost we would have to evaluate whatever language that you would be proposing so that we completely understand its implications and how we would be tasked with enforcing it on the ground and whether or not it would be subject to challenge within the courts, which creates an additional burden for
Forget all that. It's not your job. From a standpoint of if you were told that one of the elements for discretion was not somebody saying, I'm here in a vigil, that would not exempt in any way, shape, or form their overnight camping. If we clarified that, and we'll assume the men and women in black robes will look at it and approve it, would that make your job better long in the future? Your successors need to, in fact, bring uniformity and clarity, particularly as to the First Amendment.
I am not going to pass judgment.
The gentleman takes a pass on that, Mr. Zick.
I think given that the touchstone of First Amendment analysis is content neutrality, predictability would be beneficial. I'd be concerned about the impact on First Amendment rights. It makes no difference here that I disagree with the CCNV case. It is the law of the land. But in terms of writing something that is clear on its face and neutrally applied, yes, that would be a plus.
Good. And I will look forward to seeing your involvement if we get to that point. Doctor?
I believe, Mr. Chairman, that we have adequate laws, rules, and regulations in the District of Columbia that allow me to do my job in a respectful manner.
Chief, would this be good for you if you knew what to expect on Federal lands adjacent or within the District of Columbia?
Well, for law enforcement purposes, predictability and very clearly written laws are always really important, especially when you're in deposition. So we always prefer, and predictability for planning purposes, especially because on our jurisdiction, things are always moving, or at least we try and keep them moving.
Mr. Crowder? You get the last one on behalf of yourself, the Mayor, and the Consul.
Predictability and clarity are always extremely beneficial.
Thank you. And, Mr. Chairman, thanks for the indulgence in my last round.
I thank the gentleman from California. The Chair would now recognize the gentleman from Maryland, the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much. As I sat through this entire hearing, and I must tell you that I wish we had as much concern about the people who have lost their houses, the Americans who have suffered some $7 to $11 trillion worth of losses. It baffles me, it truly does, that we've now had over 118 hearings, 342 witnesses in this committee. And when we asked for somebody, one of the bankers, to come and tell us why they were robo-signing, violating the law, we can't get them. The Chairman doesn't want them to come in to explain to us why it is that they have illegally put people out of their houses, offenses that they have already admitted to. And, you know, I guess people who are protesting and are part of Occupy they look at a hearing like this and they say, this is why they're protesting. This is why. Because they see their government, particularly a committee that is supposed to be standing up for them, not addressing the issues that go to the center of their lives, period. And it's a damn shame. Because, you know, I listened to you, Mr. Jarvis. I get what you're doing. Some people would try to call it, you know, selected prosecution. You're a practical man. You're a law enforcement officer. You've been trained. You don't want to incite a situation. You don't want it to get worse. So you try to contain it and try to work with people because you understand that these people are human beings. They're human beings. And they've come because they are concerned about what their government is not doing. So, you know, I'm hoping that maybe a little tiny bit of the energy that we have put into this hearing will put into addressing the very things that the Occupy movement is all about and the things that they are concerned about. And maybe then we won't have to have these hearings. Then we won't have to worry about whether or not there'll be another Occupy. But I can tell you, and as I'm just sitting here, I'm saying to myself, I understand it. I get it. And then another thing, you know, I think about police officers. And I watch these guys here, these ladies and gentlemen of the Capitol Police. And I've seen many instances. I mean, they do it to perfection. I've seen situations where things could have gotten completely out of hand. But they find a way to try to resolve the issues and so that people can still have their rights fulfilled and do their protests or whatever. So, you know, I'm just hoping that maybe, just maybe, some of the, you know, the message will come through to us that maybe we ought to have a hearing and bring in Mazzillo or bring in some of the guys and ladies who may have been the cause of the problems that our people are going through. And may be the cause of some of those people who are sitting in those very camps who've been thrown out of their houses. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Maryland. The chair would now recognize the gentlelady from the District of Columbia, Ms. Holmes Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Lanier, would you say that the Occupy movement was predictable?
Yeah, we weren't the first Occupy camp, so yes, we knew Occupy
The
was coming.
movement, not here in the District of Columbia.
Right.
When the first Occupy protests broke out in New York, could that have been predicted?
No.
I ask that question only because, above all, law enforcement needs to have ample discretion. And the best way to get slapped down is to get an ironclad rule written into law that then goes up to the courts and up to the Supreme Court. I speak to you as a First Amendment lawyer who's been there and done that. It would hurt you as much as it would hurt the occupiers, and I don't think we want more tests of that kind. We want more compliance and certainly no escalation of violence. Mr. Jarvis, it would appear that the responses of the occupiers have affected the kind of enforcement that the Park Service has deemed to be necessary. Now, here's a question I would have asked the occupiers if there had been a witness, but you're the next best thing, so I'm going to have to ask you. What steps have the occupiers taken to police themselves and to respond to the concerns that you have raised, or that the police or others have raised?
Over the period of months I've been working with them, they have executed a number of things voluntarily in terms of site cleanup, the areas in which they're distributed in McPherson. One comment was made earlier that the National Park Service is providing the porta potties. That's not true. the occupiers are providing both the services and the cleaning of those porta potties. So they have brought a great deal of organization to the site and have been working. I think the relationship that we have on the ground is significantly different than when they first arrived. I walked through the camp myself last week with U.S. Park Police. We were greeted friendly and were able to talk directly to many of the demonstrators, and they thanked us for the work that we were doing there.
Well, I certainly want to go on record as to thank the Occupy movement for being responsive to the police and to remind them that, as they've heard from the rostrum and perhaps even from the table, there are some who would not be as friendly to First Amendment rights, and the more we can call their bluff, it seems to me, by cooperation and with the nonviolence exemplified by, of course, the icon of successful nonviolence that brought change, Dr. Martin Luther King, the better off we would be. I have to ask Mr. Zick about this notion of the nation's capital as a special place. During the Arab Spring, you couldn't get to the floor, but people were, of course, competing to egg on all of the demonstrators of the Arab Spring. Egg on, even if it brought a revolution. Egg on, even if it brought down a government that had been friendly to the United States of America. To the floor we all came on both sides of the aisle. And, of course, there was a revolution. And many of them said that they had looked to demonstrations in this country and were very grateful for the response we have had in this country. Well, the place they look to is not Oakland or Portland, or, if my good friend, and he is a good friend, will forgive me, not even Charleston. The place they look to, I dare say, is the nation's capital. I would like, therefore, while I agree with the chairman about how the Supreme Court will look at the First Amendment for what it is, if I may say so, to confer a set of preferred rights. That's how important First Amendment rights have been in our country. And if you look at the 5-4 split on the court, isn't it interesting that there are not many splits when it comes to the First Amendment? I'd like, to ask your expert opinion, given the place where we are and its visibility to the world, what the effect of suppression of the Occupy movement in the nation's capital would have been had the Park Police acted in ways other than how they have chosen to act.
Well, I think suppression anywhere would be problematic, but I take your point. This is a special place, not in the sense that it confers special rights. I think that's an important point to keep in mind. But the context is critical. The places we're talking about, if you talk about the National Mall, Lafayette Square Park, this was a point made by Justice Marshall and by Justice Brennan in the CCNV case. Those are unique places, not only because your right to petition the Federal Government applies here in the district and not elsewhere. That's a special right. But even with respect to speech and assembly rights, those are iconic, sacred, inscribed places in our history. And I think that would send a very bad signal to the public at large and maybe to the world at large with respect to our respect for First Amendment rights that we tell the world are exceptional.
Thank you very much.
Thank the gentlelady from the District of Columbia. Mr. Octor, very briefly, are you familiar with any civil liability exposure the district may have?
No, Mr. Chairman, I'm not aware at this time.
Have you been immunized by the Federal Government for any civil lawsuits that may take place as a result of anything that may happen?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not aware. I've been immunized by D.C. government as a government employee.
I wasn't referring to your own personal immunity. I hope you don't need any. I hope I don't need any either. But my concern, I guess, Professor Zick, you correct me if I'm wrong, it's been a long time. I think evidence of the violation of a rule or regulation can be evidence per se or evidence of negligence in a civil suit, right?
Yes, sir.
Well, I guess I'll finish where I started. I don't understand the sense or the use of having a rule or regulation if it's not going to be enforced. It just strikes me that the process by which we go through in this country is if you don't like a law or a rule, you change it. And if you don't feel like you can change it, we have a long, rich history of civil disobedience in this country. The most famous epistle on civil disobedience was written where, Professor Zick?
I'm sorry?
See if you would agree with me. The most famous letter with respect to civil disobedience was written where?
The Birmingham jail.
Jail, right? Not Birmingham, but the jail. So my point is this. If you don't like the law, change it. But to ask Mr. Jarvis, Chief Lanier, the Capitol Hill Police, who all have very difficult jobs, to also have to decide which laws to enforce and which ones not to. Mr. Cummings and others have spoken very eloquently about the frustration with a multi-tiered society with respect to fairness. We have exactly the same issues if we have a multi-tiered society with respect to which laws we're going to enforce and which ones we're not. So my advice is either enforce the rule or regulation as written or change it. But selecting it in some states and not others will undermine respect for rule of the law. With that, on behalf of all of us, we want to thank all of the witnesses for your comedy towards one another, for your respect and expertise with respect to your interactions with us on the panel. And with that, we are adjourned.